Hey everyone, welcome back. So previously we talked about why your essays are not answering your teacher's questions, the essay questions. Now we're going to talk about how we can build stronger knowledge of examples so that you can better apply it in your essays. Now having knowledge can be great, but if you don't know how to apply it in your essays, then you wouldn't be able to produce an essay that you want to meet your own standards, which should be high. So, to achieve this, you need to know two things. Number one, know how to build examples. Number two, deepen your understanding of these examples through case studies and all that. So, first thing, how do you build examples? So, the specifics on how to build examples really differ between subjects, but the fundamental rule stays the same. What you want to do is you want to use structures, and underpinning these structures are concepts. So, luckily in schools, right, your teachers and the education system, if it is executed properly, have already done this, which manifests in your subject syllabus. So, your subject syllabus covers the topics, and your teachers guide you through your learning of concepts using the syllabus document as a backbone. So, for example, in GP, you learn about, say, the topic of governance. You would learn some of the big talking points, right? How does it work? What are the impacts of it? And most of all, why it's so important to care about it. So, for each topic, how the teachers carry out their teaching really depends on their own pedagogies. But in Singapore, typically we boil them down to concepts and we help you engage with the material through authentic real world examples. But the thing is that you first need your basic structures in place. So in math, for instance, mathematics, right? You learn the basic functions of numbers at primary school or elementary level, whoever is watching this, and the rules that govern the way that these numbers interact with one another, how they change, so on and so forth, before you move on to the devil's spawn that is calculus, right? Or statistics for that matter. So it's the same thing when it comes to argumentative essays. Before you even obtain the ability, right, to communicate your arguments in according to whatever concepts that apply to specific topics or what have you need to first know the concepts themselves. So such structures typically differ between subjects, but let's say we look at economics, right? The subject of economics. In economics, when you are first exposed to it, you learn basic definitions, things that you would have to go and memorize, all the basic concepts and so on and so forth. So in microeconomics in Singapore, for instance, we typically first touch on the concept of scarcity. But here's the thing, econs is fundamentally a subject that explains base decision-making behaviors when it comes to human beings. So we need to know what drives human beings in general. So understanding, first and foremost, that we have finite resources, right? Based on that, human beings are constantly presented with choices. So once a choice is made, depending on the variety of factors that influence those choices, like need versus want, amount of disposable income, culture, etc., right? Whenever a human being makes choices, that results in opportunity costs, and from there you can then go on to begin to understand, okay, so based on that, right, how would that then lead to cases like why would certain goods have the higher quantity demanded as opposed to others. And then that's where you start to learn types of goods, elasticity of demand, impacts of consumption, which can lead to market failure, so on and so forth, right? So there you can then see the progress of all the concepts that you learn and how in reality they all kind of tie in to one another, right? But from there, at the same time, we can also start building examples by applying these concepts to wider institutions or even to individuals. So if we look at it simply, not that you get what I mean. Every day, human beings have a choice. We can choose to go to work, assuming that it's a weekday. We can go to work or go to school or just take a day off. Now, for us, obviously, we would want the latter. Who doesn't want to take a day off, right? But we know that in doing so, we actually incur the opportunity cost of losing our incomes or losing the chance to learn something new or to revise, in a context of, let's say, it's term 3 or term 4 and it's close to your exams, right? And you lose that chance to revise just so you can derive the satisfaction from that day off itself. Now, once we understand this concept, your next step is then to look for examples of people actually doing this, be it in the form of real life individuals making these choices, or on a wider scale statistics or what have you. And then, of course, when you apply it to wider institutions like the government has, perhaps in its annual budget, the choice of spending some money on improving infrastructure or improving the education system or investing in healthcare or social programs, so on and so forth, right? Now, the government will have finite resources, so they can't possibly spend the most to achieve the best outcome in every single sector. So then the question becomes, what is the best choice to make? And that's where we can then start to look for examples. Okay, for instance, in budget 2024, the government did these things, XYZ, invest in Punggol Digital District, things like that. And you can then start to see, okay, why would the government choose to do that? Now, luckily for us, the Singaporean government actually communicates their choices. In fact, most governments do, and they should, right? Because, taxpayers vote for them, so on and so forth. They have the mandate. More on this when we cover governance. But yeah, so we know that that's an example of a government making certain, choices that results in opportunity costs. Then we can use that and apply it when we are trying to, explain what opportunity costs actually entail, right? Now, for the government, obviously, they will have a dedicated team of economists to do this, but, the fundamental principle remains the same. So in short, what you have, right, would be structures underpinned by concepts like opportunity cost, which is the next best alternative foregone, which comes from scarcity. And then you look for examples of scarcity that create all these opportunity costs. That is how you build your basic knowledge of examples, right? And if, let's say, we were to apply it to other subjects as well, like, history, right? Because that's one of the subjects that I teach too. So in H2 history in Singapore, at the A levels, for instance, they learn certain concepts like maintenance of political stability and legitimacy. So there's this topic in H2 history called political legitimacy, and it covers Southeast Asia. And out of Southeast Asia, right, they have 9 to 10 case studies that they have to learn about, which includes all the ASEAN nations and, Brunei Brunei is an ASEAN nation, I guess. Yeah, all the ASEAN nations, basically. By ASEAN nations, I mean ASEAN nations today, not at the point of founding, right? And the concept would be things like, okay, how does the government create legitimacy? What are the changes that can be observed in the histories of these respective nations? What is the ultimate end goal, right? Because we have to define that very clearly in the syllabus, in terms of like what can be considered a successful case of maintenance of political legitimacy or cases that are failures. So this is what the history students learn, and then what they can then do would be to have all these very carefully defined examples for them by not just the syllabus, but excuse me, but by their teachers in school as well. And they can then slot it in under all these different concepts, right? So those things, okay, the structures that you have, they help you build your basic examples. Okay, that's for the first step. How do you build examples? You need to have those structures which are underpinned by concepts. If you don't even know what these concepts are, then you have to literally go back to the drawing board, consult a teacher, or if you need tuition, consult a tutor like myself, and then we can teach you all these concepts under which you can subsume all these different examples, right? But assuming that you already have... Jesus Christ, is there a cockroach? Hang on, chotomate, one moment. Okay, good news. That wasn't a cockroach. Yeah. As you get older, you let go of certain fears and you gain certain ones. Unfortunately, the cockroach is a perpetual one. Oh God. Alright, yeah, so back to what I was saying. Once you figure out how to build that base of examples, you then need to go on to deepen your understanding. Now, deepening your understanding of examples isn't as straightforward, because the thing is that once we begin to go down the rabbit hole of each subject, you'll start to realize, oh crap, okay, there are so many different concepts, there are so many nuances to each and every one of these topics. That's why we have specialization, right, in higher learning. As you learn more and you progress more in your academic career, you start to specialize more and more and more. And then we take degrees for these specific subjects to learn more about them. But of course, since this video is targeted at students at the secondary or JC level, at your levels, we already have to start this process, right? Because we have to develop our critical thinking skills from young, from when we are adolescents or babies for that matter. So this is where we have to start to delve deeper into each topic. So for instance, in GP, general paper, your teachers would prepare copious amounts of reading material for you. And once again, we look at the topic of the environment, right? We learn concepts like why it's important to care about it. And from that concept, we learn basic examples like what are the potential impacts of environmental degradation, right? And, for instance, we look at climate change and all its ensuing impacts on our ecosystems and natural environment, as well as the implications of it on our ways of life. So, if let's say we talk about one very specific example, that would be the shark fin. Okay, and why do we want to stop shark fin or shark hunting? Because the overfishing of sharks, not to mention the entirely wasteful and downright inhumane hunting practices, will have very, very profound impacts on our food web and ecosystems. Why? Because they are the apex predators of the sea. They are at the top of the food chain. If you get rid of the people at the top of the food chain, or the creatures at the top of the food chain, then those below will start to proliferate. And then the entire balance of the environment gets upended, right? Shit like this that Thanos was trying to prevent, albeit he was doing it in the wrong way. But this is just the basics. Like, these are just the basics of it. But the thing is that this is where we can start to investigate more by asking, some very simple and rudimentary questions, not too difficult ones. The really difficult ones are for those with a PhD or higher levels of learning to really go and think about, right? Or even at university level, undergrad level. But at your levels, you can start asking questions like, Why does this practice exist? Who is responsible for this? How do we mitigate this problem? And what are the challenges of dealing with these problems? So some of these simple answers would be things like, for instance, number one, why does it exist? Simple, culture. There are cultural practices there, right? With certain cultural values that drive these practices. And that manifests in the form of things, consumables like shark fin soup. And of course, from there, we can go even deeper, right? What are these cultural practices? What are these cultural values? Where do they come from? What is the history of it? But of course, if we learn about all this, it's just a never-ending sort of rabbit hole kind of deal. We don't really want to do that, at least not yet, at the secondary and JC level, right? But you get what I mean. Then, of course, the second question, who is responsible? So we can chalk this up to a few people. Businesses that profit from it, or governments not cracking down enough, consumer demand that drives the demand for all these products, which in turn, incentivizes the continuation of all these business practices. And then, of course, you can start to look for specific examples of each of these things. So, for instance, maybe in certain nations, shark hunting is very, very prevalent, right? And what are the governments of these countries that are not, taking sufficient amount of effort to go and deal with it, right? So, of course, then the next question, how do we mitigate this problem? We can, as we said, we can do it through regulations, or just an outright ban, or cracking down, patrolling the seas, so on and so forth. But of course, it's easy to look for examples like that. It's more challenging to then ask ourselves, what are the limitations? What are the challenges? Because regulations require resources, number one. Number two, they don't solve the root of the problem. So what if, let's say, we want to deal with this problem properly, we then need to tackle the cultural element of it, which really is the key driver for the creation of the demand for these products in the first place. And then, of course, from there we can start to investigate yet even more. How do we do this? Who is involved? Who are the stakeholders involved, right? What would the actions of one stakeholder, or rather, how would the actions of one stakeholder impact the rest of them? Why is there will for this thing to be changed, for this issue to be dealt with? And conversely, why is there will that oppose the regulations of all these practices, right? So as we answer each of these ancillary questions, from that one very simple topic of, okay, shark fin, why bad? Why deal with it? It's a bigly problem, okay? Or deal with it, how do we deal with it bigly, right? Things like that. As we answer each question, we then start to build more and more examples that are actually intrinsically tied to one another. And that's how you gain a more sort of solid or holistic understanding of the case study itself. And of course, the more topics for which you do this, you would not only gain more knowledge, but you will also gain a much deeper understanding of the things that you read about on the news of current affairs, and more significantly, the implications, right, or the sort of wider views of how these institutions would react to one another in the wider society. And subsequently, how is it that certain big problems become so difficult to deal with? So that is for step 2, right? How do you build a deeper understanding of your examples? On your own, what can you do? So there are some very straightforward steps that you can take. Number 1, obviously, seek help from your teachers and clarify the concepts that you have learned in school if you don't understand them, right? So before you Okay, just to be clear, yes, I'm a tutor saying all this, right? But if let's say, you don't necessarily have the financial resources to seek help from someone like me, right, who is doing this for profit, let's just call it what it is, then go and seek out your teachers. Okay, I shall refrain from commenting. They'll be more than willing to help you. Okay, in fact, I can guarantee you they would be very happy if you seek them for help, right? As someone who has experienced this before. Yeah, because then it shows that to them that you care about the material and you care about most importantly, your own future, right? So that's step one, seek help from your teachers. Get them to break down all these concepts for you and even possibly, offhand give you some examples. Because, that's what they're paid to go and learn about anyway. Okay, after you have done that, right, clarify your concepts, so on and so forth, start to build examples of the simple concepts. Try not to take shortcuts here. By shortcuts, I mean just simply insisting that your teachers give you all the examples. You can certainly ask them for some, no harm done, but don't go into it thinking that they must give you everything, because it's not that I'm trying to say that this is bad for teachers or whatever. What I'm saying is that actually that would be counterproductive for you, as then you will not be able to train your own independence when it comes to, asking questions, inquiry, looking for examples, so on and so forth. If you skirt on this now in secondary school and JC, I can guarantee you would struggle at the university level, or let's say you go straight to work, right? Or if you go to a polytechnic and then you choose not to go to university, you will also struggle there, because in institutions of higher learning, there already exists an assumption that you will go and seek out the answers to all these things yourself first. That is a given, that is a presumption, right? So it's not gonna function the same way like it does in secondary school or even in JCs. So, of your own initiative, go and build some simple examples first of all these simple concepts, the basic concepts. And then the next step 3, that you can do on your own is to ask questions. Think about the issues that you are engaging with, right? And look for the answers and therefore the examples to these questions. If you are struggling with the answers, once again, go and consult your teachers or consult tutors like myself. And yeah, step 4, the final step really, is then to start or to begin reading widely and begin reverse engineering these real life case studies using the concepts that you have learned. That being said, you should only do this when you are absolutely confident of your own, grasp of the basic concepts. Because, for instance, if you ask me to break down the mathematical principles of whatever complicated math problem and you ask me to find proofs for it, I can tell you with absolute certainty that I won't be able to do it. Why? Because number one, math is the worst subject in the world. That's subjective opinion. Number 2, I struggled with math when I was young and I've been running away from it ever since. Yes, I'm owning it, right? And what that also means is that my basics are very weak. If you present me with a very, very complex problem, I won't be able to do it. You ask me to do simple multiplication, I already struggle with it. So, yeah. So when it comes to reverse engineering real life case studies, like, for example, you get a case study of, Elon Musk and his annoyingly pervasive influence on the White House, right? How do you reverse engineer that using concepts related to governance, business interests, culture, so on and so forth, technology even? There are ways to break it down, but if you do not even know how these basic concepts work, then you can't do it, right? You can't reverse engineer all these real life case studies. So yeah, you wouldn't ask a kid to jump straight into differential equations if they haven't even learned what is 12 times 12. In fact, I can't even tell you the answer to that. What is it? I don't know. Go and find out your own, right? So just some final notes, I guess. I won't lie, this would take a lot of time and effort on your part. Your teachers, would have prepared the materials for you in school, so that's kind of half the job done, right? But you still need to internalize all these concepts on your own by building your own understanding. So again, right, if you go and watch the previous video, we talked about how you can answer questions well. In this one, it's more a case of the content, right? You not only need knowledge, you need a strong understanding of this knowledge. And how do you do that? Well, rewind it to 000 and watch from there again. So yeah, I never know how to end these things, so we're just gonna stop here. Yeah.